So I was helping my good buddy, the Top Hat Gaming Man, with a documentary that he was making on the Sega Saturn for his channel. So of course that got me to kind of dust off my Sega Saturn and start playing it, and I really hadn't played it that much in a while. And as I was playing it and having tons of fun with it, I started to realize I haven't taken a look at any Sega Saturn games on my channel yet. And one of my favorite games on the Sega Saturn happens to be a light gun game, and I realized I haven't taken a look at any light gun games on my channel either. So today we're going to be taking a look at Virtua Cop for the Sega Saturn with the Sega Stunner for the Sega Saturn. Let's take a look. Pew pew pew!
When you see that AM2 logo, you know you're in for a quality game. Virtua Cop was originally developed for the arcades and released in 1994 there. And then the port was handled by the Sega AM2 group itself as well, and was released for the Sega Saturn in 1995. And this game's compatible with the Sega Stunner light gun, which this copy here actually came with the Sega Stunner light gun, and it was also compatible with the Sega Saturn mouse. But I don't know why you would play it with anything but the light gun, and that's what I'm using here as the Stunner light gun. The Stunner light gun for the Sega Saturn is modeled after the light gun attached to the Virtua Cop arcade cabinet, so that adds even more to the authentic arcade feeling of this game. And it's a fairly easy light gun to use and pretty accurate too. Here's my 7-year-old daughter playing it. She absolutely loves light gun games, so I figured I'd get some footage of her playing Virtua Cop. And she seemed to be able to pick up and play this really easily. Now she's standing pretty close to the screen, but not much closer than where you would be standing if you were playing this in the arcade. But I tested this from the other side of the room, and the gun still seemed to be really accurate, so that's pretty cool. And like I mentioned, this is one of my favorite arcade games, Virtua Cop, and it's also one of my favorite Saturn games because this is, as far as I can tell, a pretty close to arcade perfect port as you can get. The polygon count might be a little bit lower, but it's not really noticeable, and with the light gun, this just plays amazing. And the further you get into the game, the action really starts to pick up. I mean, this is still the first level, and you can see it's already picking up quite a bit here. One of the only gripes I have with this game is that it is fairly short, but that's to be expected since it is a port of an arcade game.
So would you, if you had a Sega Saturn, would you recommend getting this game?
Yeah.
You like it? It's fun? Cool.
Always reload.
A 22-year-old arcade game is getting a ringing endorsement from a 7-year-old kid. You know it's gotta be a good game if it's still holding a kid's attention now. Like I mentioned earlier, the arcade game and this Sega Saturn port were both developed by Sega's AM2 group headed up by Yu Suzuki. That same group was responsible for several famous Sega games, including Afterburner, Outrun, Space Harrier, Virtua Fighter, Virtua Racer, pretty much all the Virtua games I believe. Just tons of amazing great Sega arcade games. So with games like that in their history, you know this game's going to be good as well. Virtua Cop was so well received that it received a sequel in the arcades, and that sequel was also ported over to the Sega Saturn. So if you own a Sega Saturn, you owe it to yourself to get your hands on a Sega Stunner and get Virtua Cop 1 for sure, and Virtua Cop 2 as well, and we'll be taking a look at that game in a future video. One other small gripe I have with this game is the loading times, which I've shortened in this video, but they're not terrible, they're acceptable for a game of that era. Virtua Cop also supports 2 players, so if you can get your hands on 2 stunner light guns, you can enjoy this game with a friend. This game just overall oozes 90s aesthetic, even down to the storyline, which is another great thing. You don't often hear of the storyline in arcade games, but this game does have one. And the brief synopsis of it is that there's a gun running operation that's been discovered that's being run by a crime syndicate called EVL. And the officer that discovered it is assassinated, but some of that information makes its way back to the police precinct. And so it's up to 2 cops to go take this gun running operation down. And the best part is those cops' names. The 2 cops that you play in this game's names are Michael Hardy and James Cools. I don't know if it gets more 90s than that. Well, maybe it does get a little bit more 90s than that, because something else that has a very huge 90s feel to it is the music in this game. The music is amazing. It sounds very much like 90s Sega music, but that's not a bad thing. This game just overall has a great nostalgic feel to it, and you do feel like you're playing in a goofy 90s action movie. Now, a word of warning about the stunner light gun, and this actually goes for all light guns. All light guns only work on CRT televisions. You'll see here I'm playing on an old style CRT television. If you're into retro gaming, and specifically light gun games, you definitely need to get yourself a CRT television before they're all gone. Another good thing about Virtua Cop on the Sega Saturn is it's cheap. You can get the game itself for just a few dollars. Unfortunately, the stunner light gun is a different story. They're not obscenely expensive, but they do run about $20 to $40 depending on where you find them. But if you have a Sega Saturn, you really should have a stunner light gun or two, because there are some great light gun games on the Sega Saturn. And if you already have a stunner light gun, you should definitely pick up Virtua Cop, because like I mentioned, it's only a few dollars. Hey, thanks for checking out my first Sega Saturn review. If you liked this video, I've got some other ones here you can watch. And also don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons and follow us at these social media links down below. And as always, thanks for watching.